Hello and welcome. My name is Tristan Claridge and I'm the convener of this webinar series for the International Social Capital Association. The association's mission is to advance the research and application of the social capital concept. And if you're interested in finding out about membership, you can check out our website, and you may also be interested in the conference we're holding next year in Dubai. In this session, we welcome Dr. Monte Schaff for a presentation titled Native American College Student Perceptions of Social Capital Development Through Facebook. Monte serves as Dean of Enrollment Management at United Tribes Technical College. His responsibilities include overall leadership of the Enrollment Services Staff, including admissions, registrar, financial aid, transfer and career services, apprenticeships and internships, and student retention and activities. Prior to his current role, Monte served as Institutional Research Analyst in the Office of Institutional Research, and he began his career at UTTC in 2010. And he worked in a variety of departments, including academic affairs, IT, and serves as an adjunct instructor. We're delighted you've agreed to give this webinar. Welcome, Monte, and over to you for the presentation.
All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for your time today. For my presentation on Native American college student perceptions of social capital development through Facebook. My name is Monte, and I'm the Dean of Enrollment Management at United Tribes Technical College. And I welcome you today with a good heart and a warm handshake. And I very much appreciate your time in spending your afternoon with me to talk about social capital development and my study. And I want to send a special thank you to my friends and relatives from our sister TCUs that might be joining in. So thank you and welcome for your time. Welcome today, and I appreciate your time. Just a brief agenda of what we'll be talking about today. I'll provide a background to the study context. I'll share definitions of social capital as I'm using them for my study. I'll talk about the background and contributions of my study, as well as the methodology and design, the foundations of social capital and campus capital, and those theoretical frameworks I used, as well as the data collection and analysis, and implications of my study, and leave some time for questions when we're done. So having said that, a little bit of contextual information. I'll start with tribal colleges and universities as a whole, because some of you might not be familiar with the tribal college system in the United States. United Tribes Technical College, where I work, is a member of the American Indian Higher Education Consortium. There's 35 TCUs, and we have 90 sites throughout the United States. There's 5 TCUs in North Dakota, and we serve students from more than 250 federally recognized Indian tribes from across the United States. The majority of TCUs offer certificate, associate, and bachelor degrees. Several offer master's degree programs, and I want to give a shout out to Navajo Tech University, who offered their first doctoral degree in 2023. So that's very exciting. One thing about tribal colleges, while we're all different, we have a common thread of sharing that mission of tribal self-determination and service to our communities. We're focused on building the next generation of leaders. And in fact, our motto at United Tribes is leadership begins here. And so I just wanted to share that background a little bit for those who might not be familiar with tribal colleges. So this study took place at a tribally controlled college in the upper Midwest of the United States. And while my biography indicates that I'm employed at United Tribes, I've had the privilege to visit and work with many of our sister TCUs. And so this research represents far more than the work I do at United Tribes. So this study took place at a tribal college. We'll call it Five Nations University. And the students at this institution end up leaving their home communities. They'll leave their reservations to pursue their post-secondary education by traveling to Five Nations University. And when they do that, when they leave their home communities, they lose those social safety nets and family resources that they had in their home communities. So they're losing that social capital by leaving their homes in their pursuit of their post-secondary education. And so this study is going to share the social capital development stories of 30 of these students from the institution where the study took place. So this is really not just a study about social capital. It's really about a story of these students who are very resilient and shared their experiences. And I'm indebted to them for their time in participating in my study. But before I do that, I want to address some assumptions. I assume you're interested in social capital because you're here. But I don't want to assume that you know what social capital is. For those of you that might not be familiar, and even if you are, I just want to share social capital as I'll be talking about it here for this study. So I'm going to be talking about social capital in terms of bonding social capital. Those are those strong ties or those strong connections with close friends and family. And those connections provide access to support for emotional well-being, assisting with difficult life situations, even, financial or other material goods. And I'm going to talk about bridging social capital, which are weaker ties or connections to those that might be less close, less familiar, friends of friends. And those provide access to information, locating potential employment opportunities, and growing one's own number of connections. Now, I say weak ties because those aren't very strong connections, but don't interpret that as meaning they're less important or of less value, because as we talk about this later in the study, you'll start to see why those weak ties are actually very important. And I also want to talk about campus social capital. Now, those are connections to information resources and members of the campus community, departments, and services on campus that students need to have in order to be successful. So those are the social capital definitions that I'll be talking about throughout this study. So I want to provide a simple example. If you don't know what social capital is, or if you say, well, what does that look like? How can I better understand social capital? Here's a very simple example of a couple of students at Five Nations University. So I've got a Kateri and Madison here. They're looking at a job board outside the Career Services office, and Kateri says, "I'm thinking of applying for this job." And her friend Madison says, "Hey, that'd be awesome. Good for you." And that's great. That support is very good. But what if we sprinkled in some social capital into this situation? So we'll go back to this conversation where Kateri says, "I'm thinking of applying for this job." And now Madison says, "Hey, my auntie works there. I can let her know you're applying." And now we see that this conversation has changed because of that relationship that Kateri has with Madison, and Madison has with her aunt, who happens to work at this company that Kateri's interested in. We see that social capital can provide very positive and significant benefits, because that could change the trajectory of Kateri's job search now. She has an in, she's got somebody that knows somebody, and that can prove very helpful. And that's the power of the weak ties. Is that, as I mentioned in the definitions, we say, that can help with finding jobs or information. And so that I just wanted to share as a very simple example of what the introduction of social capital can do in a relationship. And so a little background of Native American post-secondary information, and what I wanted to look at with my study is that Native American students as a group, they have lower bachelor degree attainment rates than any other ethnic group. They have lower first-year retention rates than any other ethnic group. And Native American students have consistently been underrepresented in post-secondary education. We're often identifying Native American students with an asterisk or grouping them in as other with other ethnic groups in post-secondary research. And so this study is going to give an opportunity to highlight and share stories that might not be represented in the current literature on social capital. Some contributors to that low post-secondary attainment for Native American college students include generational trauma. That affects emotional and mental health, lack of social and financial support, low feelings of belongingness, disconnection from family, feeling isolated, academic preparedness, and perceived lack of instructional support. And as you see, some of these reasons, not all, but some of these can be directly tied to social capital in terms of, one, losing that social network that when they leave their home institutions and they go to maybe a mainstream institution or an institution off reservation, they end up losing those emotional supports, those financial supports, and those just networks that they had within their home community. Feelings of belongingness, being connected, and isolation. Those are things that social capital can help alleviate as students get connected to resources and develop connections to others on campus. So you can see that some of these ideas get threaded within ideas of social capital, and that's really what I wanted to look at. And where I get to the contributions of the study, some of the insights that I wanted to get were, how do Native American college students perceive their development of social capital? So we can better understand, how do Native American college students build social capital? How does that happen? Are there ways that we can proactively engage Native American college students to assist with their social capital development? Can we promote that development to improve academic outcomes? And this study as a whole will contribute to the research on social capital, as well as post-secondary research on Native American college students, as I look at an underrepresented group within just post-secondary research as a whole and social capital research in general. So the problem statement, or the gap that I wanted to address, was that it's not known how Native American college students attending a TCU, that's a tribal college or university on the Great Plains of the United States, perceive their development of bridging and bonding social capital and campus social capital through social networking, because that information, those ideas did not exist in the literature when I was doing my study. And so that's the gap that I wanted to address through my study. For my methodology, I used a qualitative methodology. Social capital is embedded within relationships. It's all about connections. And so qualitative studies are super helpful for gaining insights into those socially constructed relationships. And it helps capture the details of social experiences that I might not get through a quantitative study, where maybe I'm just doing surveys or some type of numerical statistical analysis. The qualitative approach really helps me get at some of the story level data that I was looking for, and it supports gathering the perspectives of participants within the context of which the study takes place. And so I really wanted to focus on telling the story that these students were having throughout their lived experience, and I felt that the qualitative methodology would suit that very well. My design was a case study design, where my case was the perceptions of building, bridging, and bonding social capital and campus capitals through the use of the online social network Facebook by Native American college students. That was my case. And so that exploratory case study helped answer questions about the experiences of individuals within that case, right? And my focus on the case to be studied was within the environment which with which that case naturally occurs. So I studied these students within that tribal college environment where they were living those experiences. So I thought that would be a very helpful study design. I had 3 research questions I wanted to examine in my study. My first was, what are Native American students' perceptions about their development of bridging social capital through online social networking on Facebook? My second question was, what are Native American students' perceptions about their development of bonding social capital through online social networking on Facebook? And my third question was, what are Native American students' perceptions about their development of campus social capital through online social networking on Facebook? So I had these 3 questions about bridging, bonding, and campus capital. For my data, to collect the data I needed to answer those questions, I used an open-ended questionnaire, focus groups, and semi-structured interviews. So I would have 3 sources of data to help answer my questions, and that data came from questionnaires, focus groups, and semi-structured interviews. For my open-ended questionnaire, I asked questions to complete this questionnaire online. It was sent out electronically, where they answered questions about their Facebook usage, the benefits they received from their connections, and if there were different types of benefits received from their connections to close family, as well as connections to friends and more distant or casual connections. I asked about their perceptions of their development of campus social capital, those relationships and network connections between students and their campus community. And then I also asked the participants, the last question, I asked if they were interested in participating in a focus group or semi-structured interview. And those who responded yes were placed in either one of two focus groups, or they participated in one of the semi-structured interviews. And so the first source of data was my open-ended questionnaire. And then those students who indicated they wanted to be part of a focus group or an interview, they were asked questions about how Facebook connections may have led to feelings of belongingness to a larger community, how Facebook connections may have led to engagement in face-to-face activities, the role Facebook played in forming connections to the college community, and the role of Facebook in accessing resources needed to be a successful student. And so I held two focus groups asking those questions, and then I also held semi-structured interviews. I held 8 of those to ask more general questions about the usage of Facebook, the perceptions regarding their development of bridging and bonding social capital, and perceptions regarding their development of campus social capital. And so from those 3 data sources, I was able to start answering my research questions. And I did that looking through various theoretical frameworks of social capital. And I used multiple frameworks of social capital for my study. I looked at social capital as information and resources available through relationships. I included bonding social capital through strong ties and bridging social capital through weak ties. And I also looked at campus social capital, which is a form of bridging social capital, providing connections to information and resources students need to be successful, access to information and services such as advising and co-curriculum activities and other services that support positive student outcomes. And so I looked at social capital from bridging, bonding, and then this campus capital theoretical framework. For my recruitment, I did campus-wide emails. I did announcements on Facebook. I placed flyers in prominent gathering spaces. I did in-classroom announcements. I did snowball sampling. I did messaging through our campus portal. And one of the main takeaways that I from this study was that recruitment is hard. I had a much rosier picture of what recruitment would be like when I started my study. I was, well, why wouldn't students want to participate in this? Of course, they'll want to take a survey. Of course, they'll want to participate in focus groups. And it was very difficult. I had to do 4 rounds of recruitment to ensure I had enough data collected to answer my research questions. So I had 30 open-ended questionnaires returned. From that, 2 focus groups were held, and then I had 8 semi-structured interviews as well. And the focus groups and interviews were conducted over Zoom, and I recorded those and was able to use those recordings for transcription, so I could get a transcript of each of those for my data analysis. I used a reflective thematic analysis to analyze the data. This is from Braun and Clark, where my first step was to work through data familiarization. So I read through my open-ended questionnaires. I listened to the recording of the focus groups and interviews while I read the transcript. The next step was coding the data, generating themes from the codes, and developing and reviewing, refining, defining, and naming those themes, and then writing up my results. So it was a 6-step process, but part of this, you know, it looks like that's a nice straightforward piece, but I found that coding is really recursive, and you'll go back and forth multiple times. And the first reading of the data, you get something out of it, but as you really roll up your sleeves and you start going through that, the data really becomes alive, and it's just this like vibrant set of information that at first glance did not look like much, but really became a very robust set of data. So even though I had what I felt was limited participation, I developed a very rich set of data. I had 403 coded segments from my questionnaires, generating 106 unique codes. I had 195 coded segments from my focus groups with 100 unique codes, and my semi-structured interviews generated 365 coded segments for 148 unique codes. So initially, I was afraid I really didn't have that much data, but once I got into it and really became familiar with my data and got into the coding process, it really became a rich set of data for me that helped me answer my research questions. So the coded data resulted in 6 themes associated with my research questions. And so I'll go through those next. So I'll talk about each of my research questions, the themes developed from those questions, and some of the information that I got from each of those themes. So my first research question was, what are Native American students' perceptions about their development of bridging social capital through the online social network Facebook? And 2 themes that came out of my data that answered that question were participants described how Facebook helps them maintain and expand their own networks, and the participants described how they use Facebook as a source for news and information. So with respect to describing how Facebook helps maintain and expand one's own network, so the participants discussed how Facebook was super helpful for networking. They expanded their own networks. They found people that knew other people that they knew, and particularly with adding connections who were Native American. And that was one finding, that the cultural piece to that was really interesting. And the students would say that Facebook was helpful for them because they were able to connect to more Native Americans or indigenous communities through Facebook than other social media. That was mentioned multiple times. Students said, I find less Native people use LinkedIn, and they tend to use Facebook more often than any other network. Another participant said, and I have a lot of grandmas and grandpas that are on Facebook that always hit me up, and I'm like, hey. Other student participants said, yes, I feel like Facebook's very much used among the older generation in Indian country. And the participants shared their perceptions that there are more Native communities connected on Facebook. And the students would say that was how they felt connected to their homes, was through Facebook, getting connected back home, reading the online newspaper on their home reservations, and seeing what's going on with their tribal councils through Facebook. So the students mentioned those pieces as maintaining and expanding their networks. The students described how Facebook helps them share and make intentional Facebook connections. They didn't just randomly make connections on Facebook. They weren't just like, you're going to be my friend, you're going to be my friend. They indicated they wouldn't make connections with someone if they hadn't met them in person first. So there was real intentionality with Facebook connections. And some participants discussed that they kept their Facebook private. And in order to be friends on Facebook, you need to be a friend in the real world first. I needed to know you before I would connect. I thought that was very interesting. The students would say, for me, it's kind of weird and a safety issue. I'd rather talk to the person first and then get a feel of what they're like and then maybe add them. I want to see how they are. And if I like them, then I'll see what they say. Hey, connect on Facebook. And another said, I'm really choosy about who I add to my Facebook. So students were like, although they used it to maintain and expand their networks, they were very intentional on how they made those connections. So I thought that was really interesting. And then the participants described how they used Facebook as a source for news and information. Again, that bridging capital of getting access to information. Participants shared that there are various bridging capital benefits that they received. They provided access to jobs and internship information, access to news. Facebook was useful for receiving recommendations for products and services, reading business reviews. A student said, I've had many job connections using Facebook. It allows me to see what jobs are posted online in my town. All I do is just get on there and read it like a newspaper. Another participant said, I've also clicked on dog groomer, and I had a whole bunch of comments. People were like, try this person. And so we see that there were some bridging capital, social capital benefits that the students received. For research question 2, what are Native American students' perceptions about their development of bonding social capital through social networking on Facebook? I had 3 themes with this research question. The participants described how they developed feelings of community and belongingness. They described the types of supports they received, and they described their Facebook connections with friends and family. So when students talked about feelings of community and belongingness, they shared their perceived feelings of belongingness and community developed through engagement with Facebook connections. So interacting with their Facebook groups and connections helped them feel like they were part of a larger community and that they belonged. They shared that seeing a posting for a culturally relevant activity on Facebook encouraged their attendance. And several of the participants shared how making Facebook connections with fellow students helped promote a sense of community on the campus, which was really interesting because some would say, I came from a predominantly white community, and moving to this campus and making those connections with other natives, that was really meaningful to me. And so a student said, Facebook really lets you stay connected, and it made me feel like I was also part of the college campus community. Anytime I felt more connected to the college would be when I would get to know and get involved with community events and see what's happening. Participants said, I like seeing which of my Facebook friends or friends on Facebook were attending an event, and that would make me feel like I wanted to go. And so seeing something posted on Facebook encouraged participation. And so they felt like there were increased feelings of belongingness and community through those Facebook interactions. They described the types of supports they received through Facebook. They shared how Facebook provided emotional support. They shared how Facebook connections helped them when they were going through very difficult times. One participant shared that, well, my baby just got through a bout of RSV and we were in and out of the hospital throughout this week. So just posting, asking for prayers and positive thoughts and stuff for us as we kind of navigated this whole RSV thing. It was really important, and it felt really good and kept us on a positive mood to see family members, friends, classmates supporting us. Just really meaningful relationships developed through Facebook. Another one said, I use them for support. If I were to feel like I was going to give up, then I would go to Facebook and just get my support from that community. And anytime I came across a conflicting situation, or if I'm down talking myself, or any struggles that I'm dealing with, my face connection is on there, and she's giving me just this wise advice. So participants describe those types of supports they receive through Facebook. And participants shared how Facebook connections also provided financial support and other material support. They would get rides from somebody or a babysitter. They provided assistance with material needs, gas, groceries, cash donations. One participant said, there are a few times I have gotten help, or I say if I can, I'm short with food and I'm in between paychecks. There's this Facebook group called, and they provided the organization name, and they said that, so when I need help, I'll go on there, and I've gotten help. One of my friends, her house burned down in a fire, and I was able to do a food sale and advertise and post all about it on Facebook and get her some money back to alleviate some of the stresses. And so again, students just shared those really meaningful connections and the supports that they not only received, but there was reciprocity there as well, how they shared support on Facebook. And then they described the supports they received, being able to get cultural connections, cultural support. Facebook connections provided access to connect with their Native American culture, history, and language. The use of Facebook by Native Americans to increase their cultural capital was kind of a unique finding for me, because that wasn't evident in the literature review that I did for this study. So that cultural connections piece wasn't found in the lit review that I did. Students said, I follow a lot of pages that teach you our language, and I like watching the lives and stuff, being able to actually hear how to pronounce things from an actual person. Another one mentioned how that's how they started learning about their culture and their stories. Again, those Facebook connections for developing cultural capital was a unique finding of this study. So that to me was actually very exciting. And then as far as connections with friends and family, they shared that Facebook connections were primarily friends and family. So those were the major connections students had. Facebook was important for maintaining their friend and family connections. They shared how they received emotional support through their family connections, who shared pictures and videos. Participants said, it's really nice just to go there and something randomly pops up on your Facebook feed and it's your little sister doing something for the first time. I don't know, seeing that stuff really helps me. Another participant said, it makes me feel connected to my family too, especially I have a lot of family members and a lot of birthdays every month. So they're like, oh yeah, come to the birthday. It's new in town. I'm like, oh, thank goodness I have Facebook. So Facebook was really helpful for keeping those connections to friends and family. The third research question I had, what are Native American students' perceptions about their development of campus social capital through online social networking, Facebook? Participants described their Facebook connections to the campus community. That was the theme that I found in that data. And so students mentioned that participants described how those connections to the campus community help them meet new people on campus, either through classmates in class or the people you may know notifications. Those campus community connections provided bridging social capital in the form of access to information about assignments and other activities. And Facebook was a convenient way to reach out to classmates for help with completing coursework or catching up on missed classes. And the participants shared that there was some emotional support also through getting encouragement from fellow classmates. So there was some bonding social capital as well as that bridging social capital. And one participant said, the big benefit was that their classmates were only a message away. If I needed help with something, all I had to do is jump on Facebook and type in their name. Even in class, if I didn't know a certain person, but I knew they knew what was talked about, I can type in their name and their Facebook will pop up and I can be like, hey, I'm this person, I'm from your class, I wasn't there. And so again, just an example of how students were using Facebook, not just to make connections to the campus itself, but also to help with coursework. So that was very interesting in terms of those campus capital connections. They shared how access to the college Facebook page was used to reach out to various campus services, including asking for assistance, whether it was from our wellness group or maybe it was from our campus cupboard. Students were able to reach out on Facebook and ask for help from campus services. They discussed how the Facebook page was useful for keeping up with athletics and other activities. And they noted that seeing events posted on the Facebook page encouraged them to participate and start making their own campus connections. Some participants also discussed how posting on the college Facebook page played a role in their attending the institution. So they would see postings as they were looking at colleges to attend. They started looking at this college's Facebook page and said, you know what, I want to go there. So it was actually part of the recruitment process in that students would see what was posted and be like, wow, that looks interesting. This student said, I followed their Facebook and they were showing about beading night, and I thought that was really cool. There were hands-on activities that kept me informed with all the activities, and I got to meet more students on campus, which was pretty cool. I got on Facebook and looked up the college, and I was looking at everything that they would post and everything that they had offered. And the student indicated that was part of why they wanted to attend this particular institution. And so those engagements with the campus Facebook page provided opportunities to not only see activities going on campus, but were part of the recruitment process in increasing interest in attending the institution. So, as the participants described those campus connections, the majority of participants did not connect with faculty through Facebook, which I thought was interesting. They indicated they intentionally chose not to, either as a protection of their personal space or just out of respect or for professionalism. A student said, I don't really add faculty on my Facebook, but it's good that I can reach out to them through emails and they respond fairly quickly. So they found other ways to connect with faculty. Another one said, no, I try to do that with email just because I don't want them on my Facebook page. And so there was that intentional not connecting with faculty out of protecting their own privacy and maintaining a level of professionalism between student and faculty. So some of the implications of this study, it supported the current theoretical implications. It supported what was already in the literature with Facebook and social capital use, in that social capital was represented as an individual's access to information and resources through relationships and networks. Types of social capital accessible through those network connections was dependent on the strength of those network connections, whether it was strong ties for bonding social capital or weak ties for bridging social capital. And campus social capital was developed through relationships and network connections between students and their campus community, which supported student success. Those were all supported, those existing theoretical frameworks were all supported by the findings of my study, which I thought helped validate my data. Prior research on social capital through Facebook found that there was a relationship with ethnicity and social capital development, where non-white users reported a higher level in one study, higher levels of social capital than white users. And I think that was brought out in my study, where these students who were all non-white indicated very strongly that they developed bridging and bonding social capital through Facebook. And so that was really interesting. The study also supported findings of prior Facebook usage and social capital development, going back to like Ellison et al., a foundational study where they indicated they were selective in who they connected to, and they kept their networks limited to close family and friends. So that was a finding that was not only with my group, but I also found that in the existing literature as well. And then prior social capital Facebook research at mainstream institutions indicated Facebook did not play a role in bonding social capital at the institution. My study was a bit different, where the students mentioned that those connections to the campus community through Facebook promoted feelings of connectedness to the community and a sense of belonging. So I thought that was very interesting. And this study adds to the existing framework of campus social capital, in that Facebook connections to the campus community were primarily classmates and the institutional Facebook page, rather than other groups or departments, offices, and services on campus. And the participants were also very explicit about intentionally not connecting with faculty out of professionalism and privacy. And then this study supported and added to the current literature of social capital. As my study, the participants perceived their development of bridging and bonding social capital in similar ways to other studies. So that was supported. These students, a group that was underrepresented in the current literature, they perceived their development of bridging and bonding social capital in similar ways as other studies. The development of cultural capital through Facebook and social networking was not included in prior research, and that was one of the highlights of this study. Is a contribution to the literature was that cultural piece, and the participants provided multiple examples of how Facebook supported access to their Native American history, language, and provided participants with the ability to connect with their heritage. And so that was unique with this group that I studied. When we talk about practical implications, while we found through this study that connections are made to the campus community that promote belonging, there was a lack of intentionality on the part of the institution to help facilitate those connections. And so there might be an opportunity with that particular institution to leverage Facebook in different ways to promote those campus connections. So that could be an opportunity. And connections to various campus resources that could lead to student success didn't seem to be happening regularly. It was random. It was this student would say it, but then this student wouldn't. And so I would think that services that college might have, such as wellness or advising, healthy lifestyles, whatever it might be, those other services might be able to take advantage of Facebook to better connect, to make those connections to students, to provide more access to those resources. And so for future research, I think one might be to focus on new channels like TikTok or Snapchat. When I started this study, those weren't, TikTok didn't exist back then, and Snapchat wasn't as big as it is now. And so it might be interesting to see if those and other emerging technologies are showing some social capital development as users engage in those platforms. I didn't look at demographic differences, either age or gender, and so that might be something worth studying in future research. And then what I didn't know was if campus capital is being formed outside of social media. I'm sure it's happening, but I don't know how or to what extent. And so that might be something of interest as well, as how are those connections being formed outside of social media? You know, and are students building those critical relationships with faculty and staff outside of the classroom? And if so, how does that happen? And what, you know, what are the outcomes of those relationships? So to summarize, the participants in this study developed bridging and bonding social capital through Facebook in similar ways identified in prior research. Facebook supported maintaining existing connections as well as providing access to information, emotional, and academic support. The type of social capital accessible through Facebook was dependent on strength of the network connections, whether they were strong ties or weak ties. Facebook connections help encourage participation in face-to-face activities, and Facebook supports getting to know others better. Facebook engagement with the campus community promoted a sense of belongingness. Participants leveraged their campus Facebook connections to access information on campus resources, and Facebook connections to classmates provided academic support. And finally, some findings that didn't align with the current literature, the experiences of developing cultural capital through Facebook and their Facebook connections. The participants shared the value of Facebook as a means of staying connected to tribal communities, and Facebook connections provided a way to connect to heritage, language, and history. So that was a very quick, I know that was fast, overview of my study and my findings, but now if any of you have any questions, I'd be glad to hear those. So again, thank you honestly for your time in allowing me to share my study and the amazing stories of these participants.
Great, thanks, Monte. Fascinating presentation. So we'll have some Q&A. Feel free to either raise your hand, which you'll find under the React tab within Zoom at the bottom in the ribbon within Zoom, or you can simply post in the chat. And when we get to your question and I'll call upon you, you can unmute yourself and ask the question yourself. Or if you're not in a position to ask the question yourself because of a noisy environment or any other reason, just indicate that when you post in the chat and I'll be happy to read out the question on your behalf. So there's certainly a lot there to cover, Monte. You've got some really fascinating results, I think, coming out of that, particularly the piece around the maintenance of the cultural capital seems like a really big contribution to our understanding of how these kind of digital networks can be used to facilitate the capital of students. I guess while we're waiting to see who else has questions, if I can perhaps start with the first one, I'm interested in whether or not the students already had an understanding and appreciation for the importance and value of their social capital, and whether there was any kind of purposeful and deliberate way in which they were going about using Facebook and other means in order to create their social capital, or whether it was just incidental in the way they were going about their lives and their social lives.
I think they did. The participants might not have known what social capital was as far as like an academic term or by definition, but certainly they knew that their family could provide this type of support through Facebook. They knew that those close connections were going to provide emotional support and help with their well-being. And they also knew that those weaker connections, although they didn't call them that, their friends or other information sources provided access to social capital through others. They mentioned jobs or information going on in their home communities or just reading Facebook as a newspaper. So they knew they were getting those benefits of social capital, but they wouldn't have called it that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Not many people know the term social capital yet, but still people use it in their everyday lives, regardless of whether they know the term or not. So
Exactly.
so they seem to be quite aware about, especially the social supports side of building their social relationships and their networks. It seems like they're also a little bit aware of the benefits they could get from information and other types of resources. Was there much discussion or any discussion about the longer term benefits that might come as they move into the workforce and later in life?
I would love to talk about that with our alumni and see at our institution if that's happening or at this institution where these students were, because I think engaging those alumni once students graduate, if we could connect them to alumni in the community they're going to, that would be huge. So I think even just setting up an alumni Facebook group for our graduates would be super helpful, because those alumni could serve as role models as well as points of support where students would say, I'm new to this community. How do I do this? Or who do I need to know? Or I need to get an apartment, or I need to get my utilities hooked up. Those sorts of questions that they might not know going to a new place. And I think being able to connect to an alumni where you would have that connection would be super valuable. So that is actually something we would love to get going.
Yeah, absolutely, because the existing research supports just how important the connections we make when we are at school and at university, when we're doing internships. Those connections are so incredibly important and valuable as we go through our lives. But it doesn't seem like a lot of people are particularly aware of that, and there aren't necessarily the kinds of tools, like you mentioned, or systems in place to be able to help to facilitate those connections, or at least the maintenance of those connections as people move away from the university setting and into the workplace and into other communities and so forth. So it sounds like the university wasn't particularly purposeful and deliberate about providing direction in the use of Facebook and networking. Also, maybe missing some opportunities there as well to help to facilitate the maintenance of those connections beyond the university setting as well.
Yeah, those connections seem to be happening organically or by accident. And I think having some intentionality, especially doing maybe some first year experience, or ideally, what if we could connect with applicants as they apply to the institution, connect them to financial aid, housing, childcare, and all of those right away. So when they get to campus, they know names, right? Kind of intentionally building those relationships, I think would be super helpful.
Yeah, and it seems like we have a lot of similar kinds of programs. I guess that's what we always find with social capital, is it's not something that's new. We already kind of do this, even if we don't use the term social capital to understand it. But there's already sometimes in some universities there's mentoring programs, and there's Big Brother programs. There's these kind of programs that help to connect people and provide those kinds of connections. But I think the framework or the understanding of social capital helps to really understand what's going on there and why these kinds of relationships are important and how we might be able to go about facilitating them in a way that produces even better outcomes for students than what we're already getting through these programs.
So I think it comes down to educating those departments on, hey, this is maybe something you could do, or these are some tools you could use to connect with these students, or this is the value of making those connections and proving that, they lead to positive outcomes. I mean, that's what the research shows.
Yeah, for sure. So we could talk a lot about this, but a couple of questions are now coming up in the chat. So let's get to them. Perhaps we can come back to some of the other questions and discussion that I have as well. There's a couple of questions there coming up from Zach. Feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask your questions yourself. Otherwise, I can ask them on your behalf. Zach, did you want to unmute yourself? No, I'll do it on your behalf. No problem. So he did indicate that possibly he missed them because somebody interrupted him while you were talking. So apologies if that's the case. But the first question is, would it be possible to automate the creation of bonding social capital or bridging social capital score by taking your findings and automating some sort of Facebook data extractions? Does Facebook even let you do that? And would it be possible to scale and automate these kinds of findings?
Now you're talking about measuring social capital, I think. And that could be a tough nut to crack, because I'm not sure. And maybe Tristan, I think you actually put an article on that about measure, can it be measured? So maybe I'm missing the question, but so I guess I'd like some clarification, Zach, a little more a detail on what you're asking.
Sure. Well, I'll dive in. Thank you, Monty. This has been great.
You bet.
Yeah, I'm really asking the question of scaling this, right? So like you put a tremendous amount of effort into the kind of qualitative research that you performed and then taking that and making it significant. Using that, would it be if as new students come on board and you wanted to identify students potentially who might benefit from greater leveraging of a platform like Facebook for generating social capital, would it be possible to almost have some sort of early alert system or some sort of ways of using
Gotcha.
data to inform those invested in the student that this might be a student who would benefit from better leveraging social capital, things like that?
Right. So the social capital comes from connections, right? So I've got to be connected to somebody in order for social capital to flow. And so if I have a new student coming in and I say this, I guess identifying if that student does or does not somehow identify whether or not they have connections to the institution or to others on campus. That would be really interesting to see if there's some way to automate that, because then maybe a social capital score almost, or some type of, even if not a score, like you said, some type of trigger for the institution to say, hey, let's get connected, or you'll need this. Now, what we could do is if the student says they need when they do their application, they say, I'm going to be living on campus and I'm going to need housing and childcare, immediately connecting them to those departments, setting up some type of connection there. For our online remote students who are off campus and will never be on campus, those would be ones that maybe we want to start generating some type of maybe a group just for the online ones to start building that community, because we know that those students who don't make it to campus don't develop that same sense of belonging that other students would as they come on campus. So it may be data coming from a variety of different sources. Maybe it's the application or some type of intake survey from the students to immediately start saying, hey, get connected with here, with here, with here, something like that. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's really helpful. Thank you. And you can skip my second question. You gave me a lot of time and there are other questions. So thank you very much.
Oh, you bet. Thanks for coming, Zach.
And I think in terms of generating an individual's score from Facebook data, it wouldn't be possible due to privacy reasons. As far as I understand it, the Facebook data can be used for research, but it's de-identified. And so you'd be looking at broader scale trends of what's going on, but not down to the individual student level. So that data would need to come from the student themselves, I think is what you're suggesting, Monty. And perhaps this is perhaps all part of like what you're talking about, where if the university pays more attention to this, then there's the opportunity to help to make those connections, identify where there's any kinds of opportunities to build or support students through increasing their engagement through these kind of Facebook communities as well. And perhaps a measure like that, where the institution's actually asking students, and I don't know exactly how that would work, of course, but asking students to provide that kind of data to help with that score. I mean, as soon as you start doing that, you're indicating that's important, and maybe that starts to change students' behavior in relation to using Facebook in that way anyway.
I love that. And it reminded me, I was thinking of Facebook score. It's like, would you say, wow, this student doesn't have that many connections? They need to make some because they don't have as much capital. But the findings that I got from my students were that number of connections wasn't important. They intentionally kept those networks small and private. And that had as much value as, some, maybe if you think like a influencer having millions of followers, it wasn't like that. It was the number of connections didn't indicate a wealth or poverty of capital, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, let's get on to the next question. There's one there from Beth Miller. Feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask the question yourself.
Sure. Hey, I'm wondering, thanks so much for your presentation, Monty. And another person's question made me wonder about the value of tribal colleges connecting their alumni networks. I had a similar question kind of last week for the presentation about HBCUs and how I was curious if social capital gained in HBCU, if it translated to alumni from other HBCUs. So it just seems like it could be really, really helpful, especially when the colleges are so much smaller than these larger schools that have sort of Wellesley is not huge, but their alumni network is really remarkable. So anyway, any idea about that?
I completely agree. And if we could crack that nut, I would really appreciate, the value that could bring to us. But that whole alumni piece has been elusive. It has. So trying to stay connected with our students is challenging because a student might come to this university and then they leave and they go off to their home reservation, and we may lose contact with them, right? And so I think Facebook represents a great opportunity because it has that access that a lot of students are already familiar with. All we need to do, I say all, set up that alumni community and start working with current students, and then finding out, do you know this person? Do you know this person? And really building that alumni network. And I think being able to do that would bring some real value add, because those alumni are the ones the students now look up to. They're the role models. And so I think there could be, especially for like our apprenticeship and internship program, for those interns and apprentices to talk to those successful students who went off and they graduated, they are employed. I think that there's just so much power in that, for sure.
Well, in fact, it's like, you could possibly just start a new group on Facebook for tribal college alums. You don't actually have to go through channels to create an organization. You could just create a page and kind of spread the word. Okay, thank you.
You bet. No, thank you, and thank you for attending.
And Jamie also added a post in the chat about that, wondering whether or not there's a body, an organization that could help to support that. Because of course you can create a page, but the challenge is getting that critical mass, getting the interest and enough people engaging with it that other people also want to engage with it. So I'm not familiar with the acronyms Jamie used because I'm in the Australian context, but perhaps there's some organizations there that could help to not necessarily do it, but to help to promote, facilitate, encourage the engagement with it.
For sure. The American Indian College Fund would be one, a national organization, and then the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, AHEC, would be another one, because all the tribal colleges are a member of AHEC. They make up AHEC. That would be another one as well. So there are definitely some opportunities there that we're not leveraging right now. And I think this study just kind of highlights that. And before, we didn't know what that usage of Facebook was like for this particular population, and now we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, perhaps it starts with the individual institutions really taking notice of this and starting to put in place some procedures or initiatives that can help to support this. And then when the individual institutions are doing that, then it provides those bigger governing bodies the opportunity to then build on that to provide the sort of cross-sector networks that can really facilitate the improvements. So we'll get to Sabita's question that's in the chat next, but I just wanted to touch on the fact that it seems so incredibly positive that Facebook is being used in that way. Like if I reflect on my own university experience 30 years ago by now, but I didn't feel like there was much community or easy ways to connect. You could join the clubs that were on campus. You could go to the colleges on campus, but of course there was no Facebook back then. There was no other ways in which to form connections. And it seems from your research findings that Facebook's being used in a really positive and productive way amongst your participant group to create really positive outcomes.
For sure. And some had mentioned, a club page would be helpful because, like in your experiences, if those clubs had a meeting and you didn't have any automated way or electronic way to know that, you had to see it on a bulletin board, or maybe you had to get an announcement in class. And the participants would say that's really frustrating, is that there might be a meeting and I missed it because I didn't see the flyer for it or get an email. And so I think having some kind of platform like that would be super helpful. I know at one institution, they're trying a new platform called Yellow Dig, which is like, it's Facebook-like, but and maybe thinking of using that as an engagement tool for the clubs and other organizations on campus, because there's a recognized need to have one place where students can go that's going to be updated regularly and will have the latest information on when meetings are occurring, share meeting minutes, those sorts of things. So yeah, it just highlights that this is a real need. And I think that's one of those opportunities that this study provides, in that intentional engagement needs to happen. It will organically to some extent, but I think if the institution takes a real step in saying, we're going to do this because we see the value of it, that will send a message and will increase engagement, I'm sure.
And you're right, it does happen organically to some extent, but I think that's exactly the point. It's only to some extent. Like you said, it's not particularly purposeful, it's not particularly directed, and I'm sure the outcomes could be far improved if the institution took it on board and did it. So let's get to the next question. Sabita, it's great to see you again. I haven't seen you in a little while. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question if you would like, or I can ask it on your behalf. Sabita, are you there? You want to? I'll ask it on your behalf. So is there any work integrating learning with companies who wish to hire Indigenous students as a way to build their employment possibilities and networks? Another aspect of student outcomes and social networks.
That's a good question. So we do try and partner with through our apprenticeships and even some of our internships, reaching out and working with organizations within the community, businesses within the community, and also through some of our STEM programs, reaching out through National Science Foundation and others, helping to promote pathways for Native students. And so those things do happen.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. But in my own research, based on my own community, that's a big aspect for students, especially first generation students who go to university or college, is that after they finish, they can't access the labor market. So for disadvantaged groups, I always look at that aspect because it's the field I'm in, labor market research. So in my education research, I always look at what are colleges and universities doing to help students once they finish. Because in my own experience working at a university, the focus was on recruiting and enrolling students, but not on retention, graduation, and helping them with labor market outcomes. And as you know, universities and colleges are going through a very interesting period. And now we see a shift in the narrative of what is the value of universities and colleges. And we see more now a narrative of how can we help, how can we help with filling jobs, right? Especially within a anti-immigrant narrative. So we see that shift happening where before university said, we don't educate for the labor market. But now that is shifting. I don't know if it's happening in Australia, New Zealand, but that has definitely changed in Canada. So for me, it's good for disadvantaged groups that now when students go to university, there's some sort of expectation that the institution can work towards helping them with graduation outcomes, which is finding a job. Just my 2
Right,
cents.
No, that's very good. I thank you for bringing that up. Interestingly, with the Native students, many of them want to go back to their home communities, right? Their goal is to come to an institution, they earn their degree, and then they want to go back and contribute and be a leader in their home communities, right? So they're going back to their reservation or home communities. To many of them, that's where they go to find employment. Not so much to stay within like major metropolitan areas. It's really about I want to come here, I want to get educated, and then I want to go back home and make a difference in my community. And so we see a lot of that. For my particular institution, United Tribes, some of our programs focus on those short-term workforce programs, whether it's heavy equipment, commercial vehicle operation, welding, and auto, along with associate and 4-year degrees. And so we actually do a lot of that workforce training too. So that's a critical part of not just us, but many TCUs have that workforce training, because a lot of those jobs are what's needed back home. It's on the reservation. So we try and help our students be successful in those areas.
Great.
It certainly is a really important area that we're talking about, and I think like digging in on the finding that students weren't connecting so much with their professors. I mean, it's not surprising, of course, as you described, the professionalism and the privacy, and perhaps they don't want their professors to see what they're doing on the weekend. But at the same time, not connecting with their professors and perhaps administrators within the university they're missing perhaps some opportunities there to make some really important social relationships that could be really important going forward. I mean, of course, the other side of it, having been a teacher myself, I wouldn't want all of my students to try to connect with me because I just simply wouldn't have the time to build all of those relationships every single semester. So it's not like we can recommend every single student to do it, but at the same time, those relationships are particularly important, and yet students don't tend to think about how important and valuable they are and the kind of and the reasons in which perhaps forming those relationships could be a good thing to do. And perhaps the same thing applies when a student goes out and does an internship or an apprenticeship. They don't necessarily form those connections with their superiors in the same kind of way. Perhaps we can get past that a bit and try and break down some of those barriers of professionalism and privacy so people can form more meaningful relationships across those kind of power divides.
No, I love that. And looking outside of social networking, it's known from institutional surveys like the National Survey of Student Engagement and the Sense Survey, others, that with our institution in particular, we know that our students engage outside a classroom with their professors at a higher rate than, say, at other institutions. But that's, I met and talked after class. It's being done sort of in the face-to-face or real realm rather than Facebook. But maybe there's some opportunities to carry those conversations that maybe start in the classroom, but you don't have time, kind of carry those on into Facebook, or for other strategies to connect and stay connected. Again, think of that alumni piece, letting your instructor know, hey, I graduated and I'm working now, and I just wanted to, share that with you or say thank you, or, those sorts of things too. So.
Yeah, exactly. Seems like there's another piece there. So much is coming out of your research that's so illuminating and so fantastic to dig into.
I'm so happy to hear you say that, because you get embedded and you situate yourself within your study, and hearing from the outside, sharing with other people, it makes me feel better about the work I did, because as you know, that's a lot of work to put in, and seeing the value that comes out of that is very helpful for me.
It is, and there's several other comments in the chat as well that aren't questions. They're just simply saying how wonderful it is to see these really useful findings coming out of your research as well. So there's a couple of questions or comments, at least, from Jamie. Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to add to it. You mentioned about measuring, that it's good to look at the ability to spend it as a way perhaps to measure social capital. And I think there's a lot of logic there, that if we're measuring what it does, then surely we're measuring that it exists. We can't get the outcomes if it doesn't exist. So perhaps that is a really good way to measure it, because it's tangible, because we can hopefully see the outcomes that are actually occurring. And then your other comment was about perhaps connecting those organizations and building some centric circles around all of the different institutions that are involved in this space. And they might, it seems to come up again and again that we're just not connected enough at the individual level, and maybe even between organizations as well. And the more of those kinds of connections we can form, then the more we can achieve things together. And that's what social capital is about overall, right? So yeah, feel free to unmute yourself, Jamie, if you wanted to add anything else or make any other comments.
I just wrote that down, Tristan, just so I made a note, because it's like, oh yeah, we're talking about that. We just need to get it done. Let's just do it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, that's why I don't want to say anything. I want to volunteer myself. Say anything else. So I said, don't want to do that.
Well, that's right. But somebody's got to volunteer themselves. Somebody's got to take action on this, right? But we're all too busy. There's not enough time, but we have to prioritize it because it's clearly important. So we still do have around about 10 minutes. If we have any other questions, there is time, but you'll need to get them in now, because as far as I can see, we've got to the end of the questions that are in the chat already. But if I've missed something, please let me know. But if you do have a question or any comment you'd like to make, get them in now. Either raise your hand in Zoom, or you can post in the chat. But you'll need to do it quickly, because unless there's other questions, we'll look to wrap it up shortly. While we're seeing if there are any additional questions, I'll just give a bit of a plug to the webinars that we have coming up in the next couple of weeks. Next week, we have Matthias Punt, who's going to be giving a webinar. He's titled it Rooted in Community, Social Capital and the Rise of Sustainability Community Enterprises, which will be very interesting. And then the same week, actually, hang on, sorry, that's not next week, it's the week after, it's the 18th of June. Same week, I'm going to be giving a webinar that looks to provide a unified framework for social capital. So trying to piece together all of the different conceptual approaches and how they're similar and how they relate to each other, perhaps to then guide and inform the comparison of results of research across different perspectives and how they contribute and build a big picture overall rather than being isolated. And there's lots of other webinars as well posted on our website. Check out the details. So it doesn't look like any more questions are coming up. I've got one final one for you, Monte, which you've perhaps already partially answered, but I'm interested what you found was the most interesting or perhaps the most surprising finding that came out of your research.
I think it was that cultural piece, how important Facebook was to developing that cultural capital, especially students who said they grew up either in a non-native or a white community and didn't have any of that prior cultural knowledge. Now they are tapping into that. And also when the students came to this particular university where I did my study, that was the first time they'd been exposed to some of those either language immersion or cultural activities such as beading, cradle making, a sweat lodge, those sorts of things. And they said, just having access to that type of information and seeing those types of things posted was extremely helpful for them culturally. There was a lot of relevance there. And so that was a huge finding. And again, I hadn't found that in my research, so I thought that was a really nice contribution to the literature.
I agree. It sounds like a really positive piece that's come out of this. So it doesn't seem like there's any more questions. If I can just give one more plug before we finish, the association's holding an international conference in Dubai next year, and the call for abstracts is open. So I'd encourage anyone who's doing research or in fact who is using the concept of social capital in practice or policy and has some findings or some information that they want to share with people to submit an abstract. And I've just posted a link in the chat to the conference website. So we'll stop the recording shortly. Feel free to stay online for a few minutes if you'd like to afterwards for some informal discussion, make some connections, build some social capital. After all, that's part of the reason why we're here. But Monte, I want to say thank you very much for taking the time to present. We really appreciate it, and I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Oh, no, it was my pleasure. Thank you for letting me share.